Hello, I'm Tommy Moore from the Bartitsu Lab, and in this video I wanted to talk about the importance of being relaxed when you're striking preemptively. Now, if we're striking preemptively, i.e. we're hitting him before he hits us, or before he might hit us, it means that we've likely exhausted A, the opportunity to de-escalate that by using the right tone of voice, the right posture, the ability to be friendly, disarming, to be apologetic, whatever tool you wish to deploy. You've exhausted your ability to de-escalate. You've avoided your ability to deter. I'm always very keen to point out that deterrence is also an option. So you can be calming, you can be placid, you can be humorous, you can de-escalate. For some people, if they've got the right attributes, the right look, the right tone, they can escalate, so they can deter, they can essentially be more aggressive, be more scary, and use that as a route to deter violence. And doormen are often very, very good at deterrence as they are de-escalation. So again, that's another option, but let's assume you've exhausted that, or that's not applicable to you. And you've exhausted your opportunity to escape, i.e. fuck off. So therefore, you want to hit him before he hits you, before the extreme likelihood is he hits you. One of the things you need to remember is you need to be able to hit from a point of deception and relaxation. And too often we find ourselves when we're doing drills, when we're talking, when we're discussing, when we're practicing, there's a little tell before the hit. There really is a little tell before the hit. So what you need to do, and my key top tip for you to be working with right now, is get used to verbal shadowboxing. What the fuck is verbal shadowboxing? That is essentially where you get used to being able to hit on half or off beats as you converse. And it's very important to be able to do that. If you imagine, we spend a lot of time moving around, shadowboxing, we spend a lot of time drilling, how do we hit from a position, how do we get ourselves offline, and then hit, how do we use deceptive variants of the fence, and then hit, but we spend very little time practicing doing that mid-flow, mid-conversation. One, because it makes you feel a bit of a dickhead when you're at your club. We've all been there where you've been around the block a little bit, so you don't want to do all of the verbals when you're training. You find that a bit awkward and weird. As your mate Dave, play acting that you're some mandem from Croydon, just makes no fucking sense. Just the theatre doesn't make sense. But it's important to stick with it because you need to be able to hit mid-flow. Be able to hit mid-flow is where you're going to get the maximum results for minimum effort. The reason for that is if you strike mid-conversation, if you strike mid-sentence, if you strike at a surprising time, he won't be able to clock it coming, which means that you'll be able to hit him with something more significant, with more of a telling effect. So get used to, when you're practicing your skills and your de-escalation, to as you start to flow, you hit. You start to talk and you hit, even if it's just practicing at your home, in your dojo, whatever, while lockdown's going on. Take the time to remove any taboos or weirdness about drilling this. And I know it's a weird thing to drill, using your voice and acting these things out. But it's important to spend as much time as you would shadowboxing or pad or bag work, as much time as you would sparring, and as much time as you would drilling to be able to hit mid-flow, mid-conversation. Have that verbal shadowboxing. It's important. So being relaxed is key. You need to be able to fire it any shot you particularly like. So for example, if your favourite shot's an uppercut, you need to get used to talking. You need to get used to being able to firing it from unorthodox positions that don't give a tell. So as you're conversing, you're firing that shot in. You need to get used to the weird, unnatural angles that may be the provenance from where your shot comes from. That is key. You can only really do that if you practice it with a full stream of conversation like I'm having with you now. So again, I'm not throwing particularly fantastic punches here because I'm doing 3 things at once. When you're doing 2 things at once when you're training this by yourself, talk, explain, de-escalate, deter, and then throw in these shots completely by surprise. Try and reduce the tells. Everybody's got them. I've got tons of them. Everybody's got them. So do these things. Sometimes record yourself and you'll see, I've moved that shoulder a little bit here, I've cocked that hip, or I've done something, or I've stopped speaking. Sometimes the biggest tell is verbal, millisecond pause, hit. What the fuck do you want? Everybody can see that coming. So what you need to do is, what the fuck you want? You need to get used to being able to hitting off a half beat at a time which is unpredictable, and really drill that down. It's a really good time right now to refine, record yourself doing these verbal shadowboxing, fire in a variety of shots from different angles, and get used to what your tells are or what they could be, and then redact them down. You know, it's an exercise that I'm trying to do myself right now. Look at your tells, find out where they are, so that you can fire from a place of complete relaxation. As you start to talk and you're very relaxed and you start to gesture, boom! How can you fire those shots? A really good way to drill this is to be super slow. Tai Chi your conversation, so your mouth is still talking fast, you're still talking slick, you're still talking often and cogently, but your hands and your movement, boom! You get used to being able to fire these things. You know, I did it there, I did a gap. Used to be able to fire these things mid-conversation. It's important to find where those vulnerabilities are, where you're not flowing it incorrectly, go back and address it. So for me, verbal shadowboxing is a really key bit to keep up a flow of conversation, to keep up escalation or de-escalation, and then being able to hit in amongst that in a very surprising way. It's also a very useful tool for misdirection, in that let's assume that you are my bad guy number one. I need to be able to talk cogently to, whoa! I need to be able to speak to you, disarming enough for him, and hit him by complete surprise. So we need to be able to have that conversation and me being able to strike. And again, there'll be all sorts of tells that you want to record, look at, try again, refine it, refine it, refine it, refine it. It's a really useful tool to have. So get used to that verbal shadowboxing, whether it's directly to an opponent as you start to talk, yeah, that could be a thing you do. Or again, where you're misdirecting, where you think you're the point of engagement and he thinks he's the ambush. So I'm going to go ahead with this theatre. I'm going to go ahead with this theatre. I'm going to gain that conversation at midpoint without breaking your stride, being able to hit, attack, move, do something offensively to this guy. So again, when you look at fighting from a 360 perspective, being able to maintain a cogent conversation as your cover, as you hit, is a really important thing to do. So there's the relaxation bit, and the relaxation really comes naturally. If you're relaxed, you hit harder and you hit faster. There's less tension and he doesn't see it coming. So it's faster, more powerful and more effective. One of the best ways to stay relaxed is being able to fire mid-conversation. If you can fire it mid-conversation, it just goes, it just flows. But what you will find is that your typical disciplined hook, your more orthodox uppercut, you know, your longer range overhand, whatever, they soon start to morph into things that are a bit more abstract. You know, your uppercut or your hook starts to get a bit shovelly, because as you start to talk, this manifests a lot, this manifests a lot, and from here, the shovel is an easier tool to deploy. So you've got that kind of motion. Your hooks really depend on the elevation of your elbow at that time. So if my elbow isn't very elevated at all, my hook again is a bit more shovelly. If my arms are a bit more splayed or a bit more open, or my fence is a bit more projected as I'm talking, then it can come round in this more lateral sense. So if my fence is more projected, I can fire that kind of shot. If my hands are held high, if I'm being very supplicant, if I'm being very defensive, if I'm very cowed, then my elbow being up means that my hook might start to turn more into a overhand style shot, like so. So I might start to talk from this, be very supplicative, very scared, very afraid, and fire that shot. So again, the verbal shadowboxing will help you pick up and articulate different types of punches, different types of strike that blend more cogently with conversation, with gesturing, with positioning, but always be running your mouth. Yeah, it's an important thing. You want to make sure you're really exhausting all those options of de-escalation and deterrence. So your mouth is always operating that smoke screen. Now you want to make sure you're not being stupid. If you really are about to get clocked, don't be blah, 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 blah. You know, if you get hit with your mouth open, it's going to be a bad time. But if you engage in conversation, the more you're talking, the more he believes you're not hitting. If he's responding, that's a great time to be hitting him. But again, try not to have too much of a pause when you're flowing. Try and build up a constant stream of information, because that information is misdirection. And that misdirection allows you to strike in a relaxed, powerful and unexpected way. And then finally, as you start to do that, you'll clock other bits of useful data too. So you'll start to notice that A, strikes are coming from unusual angles. And one of the best ways I explain this is that, it's a shame I don't have one of those expensive Bobs with arms or a human right now, but there we go. Assuming Bob has arms. Those arms for me essentially make up an exclusion zone. Those arms make up an exclusion zone, which means that there is no point, let's imagine this black pad is the exclusion zone. There is no point in me hitting where those arms or hands are, because his ability to block or cover or smother my particular strikes will be fastest. If his hand's here, me striking in the area where his hands are, give him the best opportunity to block, cover, smother, grab. So if there's an exclusion zone in front of Bob, let's say there's an exclusion zone in front of me, because my hands are here, you need to be able to get used to be hitting over, under, or around the exclusion zone. It's a really key piece. So with that exclusion area, you need to be able to hit above, around, underneath to cause maximum effect. So that again is where you can get very, very good with your verbal shadowboxing. If you've got a pad like this or something larger, you can start to replicate what it's like to have a human's arms in the way, which makes that awkward for you. You know, it's a bit like trying to punch the centre of a Wing Chun dummy. There's just shit in the way, and people's arms are shit in the way, and they move. So you get used to being able to have conversations, understand an exclusion zone, and therefore the types of punch might be different to what you normally do. You know, as opposed to your classical cross, you might have to get around that exclusion zone. You know, I can't punch across this exclusion zone right now, or it's riskier. But what I can do is go over the top of the exclusion zone, like so. Boom. So again, it's a good bit of kit, it's a good mental exercise to be in, that wherever the opponent's hands are, that essentially gives me a bit of a black spot where I can absolutely hit, but it's got more risk for me. It's got more risk of hitting something inessential like a forearm or a hand. It's got more risk of being covered, blocked or grabbed. So me being able to hit around the exclusion zone, above it, around it, underneath it, and being able to do that naturally mid-flow, mid-sentence, being able to talk, and then understanding that if my hands are here, his hands might be here. So my natural thing to do might be to punch it in an orthodox way, an unorthodox way, over the top to get around that exclusion zone. Doesn't really matter, as long as you've got decent punch discipline, whether you throw it, you know, whether you throw a tight, orthodox hook, or whether you throw something weird, a bit offbeat, a bit off centre, a bit off angle, coming down at a 45, you know, doesn't really matter, as long as you're applying the right force, speed, targeting, and a decent weapon is hitting a decent target. It doesn't really matter. It's not about aesthetic. In this instance, the verbal shadowboxing drills are you being able to maintain a cogent stream of information and then being able to hit surprisingly at any distance. So it could be close range like that, it could be longer range, mid-range, whatever. You know, get used to motoring up here, but being able to subtly fire in things as you flow through. Watch out for that exclusion zone, which makes your job a little bit harder, and it's an important thing to train at home. And then obviously you can start to apply greater principles. Once you've got good at that, once you've got the ability to hit and flow as you talk, you can start to apply things like the swamp principle. You know, so the swamp principle, relatively well known around the world. Stay relaxed. S. W, weapon first. So I'm relaxed. The weapon has to accelerate to the target first. If this is the target, the weapon needs to move. The A is exactly that, the acceleration. So I'm relaxed, the weapon moves first and it accelerates. Pap, pap. I then need to make sure I move with it, because if I move in the direction of the strike, it's going to be more impactful. So as opposed to, I can now go, move in the direction of the strike. And then finally P, to plunge or to penetrate. Add that extra depth to the shot. So you end up being able to be relaxed, do it mid-flow. You plunge, you hit with the weapon first, it accelerates, you move in that direction and you plunge at the end, which is a very important thing, whether it comes from underneath, around the side, over the top, straight in the middle, whatever you want to do. That swamp principle is very sympathetic to verbal shadowboxing. So if you've never given it a go before, give it a go today. Get used to talking, maintaining a stream of useful information, match that to likely scenarios, and then try and get rid of your tells before you hit. Try and do it mid-flow. Get used to the art of misdirection. So as I start to engage with you, I can hit this guy cogently. He doesn't know because I'm talking to you. You've got to be able to reduce those tells and be able to strike with power, speed, a degree of accuracy, and you need to be able to do that when they don't see it coming. That's what makes the preemptive strike so effective at this time. And then as you start to nuance it, you might want to apply things like the swamp principle and the exclusion zone to making sure you're hitting with the best possible weapon at the best possible time with the least possible chance of interference or someone lessening that strike. That exclusion zone is a really useful tool and opens up some very unorthodox angles of striking that come down the clock. You know, think of it like a clock face. We spend a lot of our time punching at 3, at 4. We spend very little of our time hitting at 12, at 1. We spend very little of our time looking at 5. But again, some of these angles allow us to work around that exclusion zone where the opponent's hand or attention might be. So get used to playing with it. Verbal shadowboxing. Give it a go. Whoop.